Hello, and welcome to the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. Her name is Sonia Chand. Sonia Chand is a person on the autism spectrum. She is the host of a podcast called On the Spectrum with Sonia. On that podcast, she discusses mental health related topics, autism spectrum disorder, and inspirational stories. The purpose of the podcast is to leave the audience feeling inspired and connected. Sonia also has a memoir coming out in early 2025 called Dropped in the Maze. The memoir is about being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at age 20. Apart from being a podcast host and author, Sonia is an avid runner and featured on NBC. She also works as a psychotherapist by profession. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on here today.
Yes, I am so excited about our conversation. But before we dive into today's topic, I want to ask, what are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
3 things I'm most passionate about and why. Number 1, helping other people, because I know the importance and how good it feels when somebody is out there in your corner and is cheering you on and being your cheerleader and uplifting you. I feel like we live in a society where there's just so much competition out there, and there's not enough cheerleaders for one another. And I feel like, I want to be different than what we see, too much in the world of. Another thing I'm passionate about is health and fitness. I believe that, a healthy mind, is a healthy body go hand in hand. And I feel like it's part of allowing me to do what I'm passionate about. And the third thing I am passionate about is nature, being out in nature. And I am a long distance runner. I just love running. I just feel like I kid on Christmas. It just allows me to be me. And I'm also passionate about many other things, alongside nature is like night skies. I love the night sky. I love watching sunrises. I love just, all sorts of things. Theater. I love music. I love movies, wine and dine. I love going to different restaurants. I love a nice, good glass of wine at times. I just love everything. Cooking. There's so many things I love. Technology. I'm a tech geek, actually. I am a tech geek in that sense. Yep. So,
Wow.
I mean, I'm all about that kind of stuff, makeup, clothes, all this, you name it. But you know what? I'd rather spend time in a tech store more than a clothes shop at times. So that's
Mm.
kind of, and I love to travel. That's another
Oh,
thing I'm passionate about too. And there's just so many interests and varied things that I'm into. And I enjoy being around family and friends and things like that.
wow. Yes, I love all of those. Like, you're better than me with the running because I can't run. Well, I tell myself I could run, but like, I don't like doing it as often.
Yeah.
But I do like really love like the travel, just like also tech stuff too. Like, I'm not as much of a tech person, but I do appreciate technology and everything. And I love what you said about the cheerleaders because it is true. Like, we don't have enough cheerleaders in the world to like actually uplift us and cheer us on. So I definitely connect with that.
Mhm.
Sonia, I want to get into your story and like your background with autism spectrum disorder. So can you share about your mental health journey, like how you got diagnosed, the aftermath, managing that, and like how you felt about the diagnosis, just your mental health journey?
So the mental health journey started when I was young. It started when I went into first grade and I just was not able to socialize in the way other kids were socializing. Even when I look back at my early childhood, I was more involved in toys. I never really remembered being around people as much. I would go to school, and here's the thing, I just couldn't handle all of it. I didn't even understand what school was about to begin with. And then I never was able to fit quite in with peers. I was always that girl that was not getting invited to birthday parties. I actually ended up failing second grade. I got put in a public school where teachers were not much better. I passed the second time around, but even then, the same problem persisted with being bullied by teachers, being bullied by peers. I had a psychological test done at the beginning of my retake of second grade. So the retake happened in 1990. Okay. Early that September, I had a psychological exam that showed developmental delay and Sonia not being, and it said, Sonia's not able to understand motives, not understand where people are coming from, not understand social cue, like, you know,
Mhm.
discussing many autistic traits. But then they just recommended I go into therapy. My parents never put me in therapy because, back then, right, and them being Indian, they were like, there's no need. We'll just send her into school to like the school group therapy that they had, which was really stupid in my opinion because they
Mhm.
didn't, in my opinion, it was just a waste of time. Once again, the same problems kept persisting, right? Nothing was being worked on in terms of like friendship making. I thought I had made like a couple friends, 2 or 3 friends, but I was very sensitive at school. I would cry at the drop of a hat. People would work me up. People would be just rude for no reason. I never quite understood why people were the way they were. And it was not until 5th grade where I got an answer that Sonia, you stick out a little bit. But up until that time, it was like a lot of bullying. I also lashed out at people as well because I couldn't handle all the bullying. So I lashed out. So it would be like pranking somebody's home. It would be writing a terrible note, and I'd take ownership on this. I grew up really lonely, really sad, really depressed, friendless, just being not wanted by anywhere really. And so in college, I went to a local branch the first year before transferring to a main branch of the college. And the therapist started noticing some behaviors, and she thought I needed to get psychologically evaluated, and I did. And then the psychologist said, we need to get you further evaluated by the neuropsychologist because this looks like it could be more than just a nonverbal learning disability. It looks like there might be a nonverbal learning disability, but this needs further investigation because it looks like there's more. And then when the neuropsychologist looked at it, she said, okay, you have what's called Asperger's syndrome. And that finally dropped in 2002 in the fall, in my sophomore year of college. My previous therapist told me, or not the previous, the psychologist before said that he was pointing to that direction, like that might
Mhm.
be. And then actually, then during my summer going into college, actually, one lady who was a family friend of ours who was a teacher, okay, she was my 4th grade teacher. The 4th grade teacher I had ended up becoming my tutor in 5th grade because my parents hired a tutor for me because I struggled a lot being in that school district. But it
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily because I couldn't learn. I think it was because I was in the bad environment,
Oh, yeah.
and that took a toll on me, right? In every which way, shape, or form.
Mm.
And when you're a child at that young age, sometimes you don't understand, hey, this hurts me, or this is what's
Yeah.
going on, right? Like you don't know how to verbalize all that.
Right, right.
And a lot of times Indian parents, though, too, with all due respect, they don't also ever teach kids social learning like that, right? Like they don't a lot of times. And I don't think I'm the only one that I can speak for. I'm sure there are many people that probably could echo that sentiment, similar sentiment of Indian descent. And the reason I'm just saying Indian descent is, I don't want to speak for other
Right.
groups. So she basically really took me under her wing, and she started noticing behaviors of a student that was coming into her class. And she had noticed he was a lot like me in some ways, and he had autism, diagnosed autism. And she called my mom one day and she's like, "Oh, I think I know a way Sonia could be helped." And so we went to this meeting that was held in a backyard, the student's backyard, and some of my old teachers were there, and they were all discussing ways to help this person, help the student. I met with the people from the Autism Society that had come up, or the Autism organization, and
Mm-hmm.
they were actually staying at a local hotel because they were from Southern Indiana. And so we met them after we met them at the hotel, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Sonia, you should get evaluated because what you describe sounds a lot like the student we work with."
So, how did you create like the On the Spectrum podcast, and like how has it impacted you by having others share their stories?
So I created this podcast because I'm writing my book. I started writing this book back in 2005, but then life got in the way. I started writing this book, and in the process of editing, I always knew I wanted to have a podcast because that was always kind of a dream of mine too. Because I always like to hear people's stories, and I I love listening to other people's points of views and world's views and things. So, and the reason I had this podcast is because I wanted other people to feel more connected. I wanted people to feel like they're not alone. I feel like we live in a society where we're constantly feeling like we're alone.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree. And like speaking of your memoir, can you tell me the inspiration behind the title, Dropped in the Maze, and what are some takeaways that readers can get?
So I have this. The reason it's called "Dropped in the Maze" is because I look at life as a maze, right? And we're all in our own maze, irrespective of whether you're on the autism spectrum or not. I feel like we're all in the maze. And "Dropped in the Maze," the whole title came about is because I was, the whole analogy is I was blindfolded until I was 20. When I was 20, the blindfold was taken off, but then in a I was so lost in the maze that I had to navigate the rest of my way in clear sight, but not knowing a lot of how to even navigate through how to get out, right? And
Yeah.
so, and there's still things that I still am navigating in my maze, but I think that some of the key takeaways is lessons learned from my experiences socially, lessons learned from an emotional standpoint, lessons learned about self-love, how do you channel your self-hate to self-love?
Mhm.
How is it that, how can you make yourself feel like you're worthy? How do you make yourself feel like you are enough?
Mhm.
These are some key takeaways that I want people to realize is you may be diagnosed with something and people may treat you like you are the piece of gum under their shoe, okay?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, you are a, a superstar in your own being. And that's one thing I want people to know is that having autism is not the tragedy. It's other people whose ignorance and hatred are the tragedy. It's nothing because there's nothing wrong with you. You have a unique operating system.
Hello again. Before you dive into the rest of today's episode, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support and for hitting that play button. If you want to expand on that support, here are 3 ways that you can do so. 1. Leave a review. If anything in today's episode resonated with you, or you want to share how the podcast changed your life, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. 2. Check out our shop. The Rough Edges shop is a faith based, women of color owned online shop where you can get a variety of products from tote bags, journals, t shirts, crew necks, and more. 20% of the proceeds go to a mental health organization. So check it out at roughedgespodcast.com/shop. 3. Connect on social media. Rough Edges is on a variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more. If you want to connect outside of listening to the podcast episodes, you can do so on those platforms. If you have any more questions or want more information on the ways that I've just discussed, you can check out the episode description or stay to the end for more information. Now, enjoy your episode.
It's like saying, okay, well, if I have an iPhone and somebody, let's say, has a Google Pixel, okay,
Right.
we can both do similar things. It's just the operating system is different.
Right.
iOS is the operating system for the Apple, and Android, Google, I mean, all that is for different phones.
Right. Yeah.
Those are all for different phones. Android, I believe, is the operating system for that phone, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But the
Yep.
whole point being is that we all can get to the same place. If you want to access Instagram, you could do that. You want a text message, you could do that. You want to make a phone call, you could do that. But
Mhm.
it just requires a different operating system.
Yes. Wow. I love that. I love that analogy so much because it's true. It's like we all are human beings. And
Mhm.
just because some people are dealing with different like conditions and things that they are going through, that doesn't make them any less human and any less worthy of
Mhm.
kindness and respect. So I do love that analogy a lot.
Yes, definitely. We are different. Thank you. And I think definitely because we are different. We are, but it's okay to be different. And that's the thing. And that's one thing I want people to realize is being different is not a bad thing. It's not a tragedy to be different. And I think too often than not, our society places emphasis on the fact that if you're different or you're considered weird, right? Like that word weird is very used negatively. I
Mhm.
look at weird as being like badass, okay? Like this is, I mean, if you're weird, go for it. Like,
Right. No, I agree. I definitely agree. And speaking of like, people having certain misconceptions about things, if you could change like maybe two stigmas about the autism spectrum disorder, like what would they be and why?
the first stigma I'd like to change is that you have to look a certain way to be on the autism spectrum.
Mm,
Because the thing is, autism doesn't come with a look, it doesn't come with a genetic phenotype like you would see in someone with, let's say, Down syndrome. Okay. Anybody, autism looks, anybody, it's like people who have autism come in all different appearances. Okay. And we can't just judge somebody based on how they look to decide whether they have an invisible disability. And the second one is that everybody who has autism, the Rain Man reference, right? That they must be like Rain Man. Truth of the matter is, people on the autism spectrum have their own strengths and talents, just like anybody else.
right.
And not everybody has that ability to memorize a jukebox. What songs are in the jukebox, or phone
Mm-hmm.
numbers, or like or how many toothpicks fell, like those
Uh-huh.
things. I just feel like that, is a misconception because everybody's so different, in their own talents, their own strengths, their skills. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. People on the autism spectrum, just like anybody else, has strengths and weaknesses too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I want people to know is that, that's, the that it doesn't, that number one, it doesn't come with a look, and number two, it's not just everyone's like Rain Man.
Yeah, I really love that, especially like the fact that autism doesn't come with a look, like you said. And that could also go for like mental health conditions in general, because like
Exactly.
people often assume, and I love how you mentioned like Down syndrome, because people often take that experience and place it for everything. And that is a horrible stigma and stereotype to associate with autism. And I just love how you mentioned like it doesn't have a specific look, but it's just like people are dealing with different things, you know?
They're dealing with different things and they are going through uh different lessons, different,
Mm-hmm.
things that they go through. Some things happen later for people. There are many people who are out there on the autism spectrum, perfect example, who for example, may not have ever been intimate before by a certain age, right? Or there are people out there with, who, there's some that get married and have kids and have a family. There's some that really struggle, and
Mhm.
dating might not even be a thing, or, it's not as simple for them, just to be like, oh, just put yourself out there, you'll find somebody. It's not like that. I wish people would just realize that too. It's not like that. There's something about you that people have to also connect to, somebody
Right.
to understand you, and that kind of level. Um, the friendships are not going to be many, right? The friends will be very few, but in a way, even if there are a few friends, that's better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. What are some of the most challenging and also most rewarding aspects of trying to manage with autism spectrum disorder?
I guess some of the challenges would be also just the intense feelings you feel from others, the energy, because you know that there are a lot of people that you'll come across that will treat you really well at first and then treat you like your chopped liver, and you won't necessarily understand where that came from. So that's always going to be a challenge. Loneliness, that's another challenge you deal with when you're on the autism spectrum, because and also just dealing with past trauma. A lot of people on the spectrum have dealt with some trauma in that, and so just working through that. um but some of the rewards of being on the spectrum is, it allows you that energy and motivation and determination to go after your intense interests. It allows you the opportunity to pursue what you want to do. One of the things about autism is that it never lets you give up. So your intense interests, I tell you, when they are honed into, they're honed into.
Right. Yes, I love that. Well, Sonia, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. But before we go, I would like to ask you one final question. What advice or words of encouragement do you have for someone who is struggling to manage their mental health?
Well, first and foremost, I hope you are able to find a great therapist to work with, because I feel like having a therapist is going to be so important. Um, and if you're struggling to manage your mental health, I feel like also if you have like a good outlet that you can channel some of your feelings into, like for me, it's running. And it allows me, like I said, to be me. It allows me to express my anger, express sadness, express everything. I can feel all the feels when I'm out on a run. Um, Also, just remember one thing: your mental health doesn't define who you are as a person, right? Your mental health is just a part of who you are, but it's not everything about you. And if anybody here is struggling with thoughts that I have struggled with about not wanting to be here anymore, okay, and that's one thing I will want to say as well is, please understand that you are needed more than you believe. Like, your light matters. You may think that you don't mean anything to the world, but you never know. Maybe that person that you smiled at or gave a compliment to, or always said good morning to, you never know. Those people, it might mean their world, right? Like, you just never know. Somebody somewhere is appreciative because of something you've done, or somebody somewhere is happy to know you, even though it may not feel like it right now, but somebody somewhere remembers you.
Oh, I love that so much. And thanks again, Sonia, for joining me. And where can people find you to anticipate your memoir?
So I have a website, soniakrishnachand.com, SONIAKRISHNACHAND.com. You can subscribe and get information from there. My podcast, On the Spectrum with Sonia, is available on all podcast platforms, audio podcast platforms, that is. And then you have my Instagram is Chand, CHAND _SONIA. That's my Instagram handle, so you can always find me on there as well.
All right, awesome. So thanks again, Sonia, and everyone. Stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more updates on the podcast, you can follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast, or you can visit the official podcast website at roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.